So, whilst Jim's so rudely interrupting throughout the whole of the lecture, right, we can then do them at the end. By the way, there's one person away next week, so...
Is it you?
Yeah.
It's me.
What do you mean, is it me?
Well, I won't be here either.
Oh my God! So we got
Two spares. Jill and Jan come.
Jill and Jan. Oh, a new woman called Linda next week's coming then.
A new one?
Yeah, she's Jewish.
Well, we can't fit people
Where's she
in then.
gonna
when-
sit?
No, I'm only
Janet
joking.
John's
I'm only
here.
joking. I'm just like Janet and John's coming.
Well, Steve comes back.
Steve. Oh, Steve. Steve's coming back. He said. Yeah, I spoke to him on the phone. He said he's in his new house. He's in his new house, but he don't like it and he wants to move back.
Oh.
Right. Okay. So Alexander the Great.
Sounds like me, actually.
No. Okay. Now we're looking at we did the disease lecture and all the rest of it. And obviously, getting back to the archaeology. And next week we'll be doing the archaeology of somebody from Cardiff. No, we'll be doing the archaeology of a Swedish woman.
Swedish.
A Swedish woman. Don't forget, I'll give you your eggs at the end.
Right now.
Keith, I've got a raffle prize to give you, but I won't give it to you in the room just in case you spray it like an idiot called Dennis. So Alexander the Great. What do we know about Alexander the Great? Lots, but we're not going to talk about the Alexander the Great himself. We're going to talk about his burial. Okay, we're going to talk about where he may or where he may not have been buried.
Oh, we don't know,
So this we don't know, but this is we'll do all the stories. This is absolutely fascinating. So what we need to do, I need to get my stuff on the screen, right? And I should have it. Here we go. Oh, hang on, where's my stuff gone? Shut up, you.
Well, I heard he was buried in Alexandria, and he was in a coffin at somewhere, or whatever, and he was dressed in his gold armour, so that people could come and have a look at it, and people like, did go and look at it, and then Caligula came and he decided he wanted the army, so he tried to strip it off him, and he was stuck with the body fluids, and stuck to the armour, and so he ended up messing up the corpse, which looked very, because obviously the Egyptians had treated it so that he looked fairly alive and
Just fine.
and so he thoroughly messed it up by forcing the armour off so that he could take it home to Rome, and they didn't know what happened to the body afterwards.
Right, you've just done a lecture. Has anyone enjoyed that?
Right, several ideas. So
you've done them all. Right.
Just one.
Okay. The Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great is believed to be buried in two key locations. This is a place called Ammonopolis. If you say it quick, yeah, Ammonopolis, which is between Thessalonica and Aegina, which is in northern Greece, old Macedonia. And this was found not so long ago. It was believed to be the burial place of the great Alexander the Great. And what we need to do, we need to get back to some of the facts that Kathy so wonderfully gave us back then. So she's done all the first bit, I just need to do the rest of it. Right, good. It was thought that Alexander the Great should be taken to Macedonia to be buried alongside his father at Aegina. And however, on the way, Kathy's right, his body was hijacked by the greatest of great generals, Ptolemy I. Now, when we look at Alexander the Great, we can look at his conquests, but we've done that before. The place where he's buried, the location is rather interesting. But the place that he was thought to be buried is again this place known as Ammonopolis. And if we actually look there, there's Ammonopolis, slightly a bit further over from, there's Aegina, sort of over here. So what we've got, they found in 1912 on a mound in Ammonopolis this sort of lion statue. And some believe that it could be the place where Alexander the Great is buried. But it's now turned out in more recent years to be the burial place of his mother. Rather interesting, this, isn't it? That his mother isn't buried with Philip, who's buried over here. But Philip had a few more relationships than we know about. So with this sort of a set as a backdrop, we then go straight to Alexandria. Alexandria, northern Egypt, the city of Alexandria today. Much of what we do understand about Alexandria today has been destroyed, has been excavated, or lost under the waves, which is the modern day harbour at the said place. It's known as Alexandria. Why? Because it's named after Alexander the Great. Ptolemy, after the death of Alexander the Great at Babylon in the year 323 BC, 13 years after his great rape and pillage across the world, apparently he died, some say from consumption, some say he was drinking too much, some say that he was poisoned, some say he was shagged out from all the conquering. His body on the way to Macedonia was intercepted by the guards of Ptolemy, who felt that he had a right to the body of Alexander the Great. Not to Alexander the Great's riches, because they were already bestowed upon not just one, not just two, but three generals that were the favourites of Alexander the Great. And the empire slowly fell apart. An empire that took 13 years to build is an empire that took 9 years to completely fall apart. Bit like the Third Reich in Germany in the Second World War, but that's a very strange analogy. But Adolf Hitler did respect Alexander the Great greatly, and so did many other people in history, and that's where we go. It's said that for a time Alexander the Great was buried in a golden coffin, and that golden coffin itself remained intact for 100 years. However, as things go, the gold was taken away. And the gold was taken away and melted down, and the tomb itself replaced as a glass tomb. Some say this happened around 250 years BC. Some say this actually happened in the year 48 BC. What's happening in 48 BC is the visit of Julius Caesar. And a little bit after that, it's believed that the gold was taken from the tomb to finance the war of Cleopatra against Octavian, the great emperor Augustus. Now, the interesting thing is about the tomb of Alexander the Great is the real history from 48 BC. And why? Because Julius Caesar is writing about visiting the tomb of Alexander the Great at Alexandria. Now, this is a rather interesting point I would like to make. Whenever we look at Bede and Gildas, when we look at British history, we always believe everything they say. Whenever we think about the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, we always believe everything they say. So why not believe that everything that Julius Caesar is saying is genuine? That he actually visited the tomb of Alexander the Great. That should be enough. And then we got the references to the gold being removed by Cleopatra to fund her war. Now, is this actual history? Are these real reports? But the reports persist. The reports persist very much so. Shortly after the death of Cleopatra, somewhere around 30 years BC, the resting place of Alexandria was visited by the great Emperor Augustus, otherwise known as Octavian. We were visited by Augustus. And apparently Augustus offered the head of Alexander the Great in a glass case, a diadem of gold, a crown of gold. Now, this is rather interesting. I don't know if any of you have ever seen a transparent coffin, a glass coffin, but I have. when I went to Zakynthos when I was a child, it's the most boring place on the planet. But in 1985, we went to Zakynthos, and the only thing of interest there was this church, and you could all go in there and queue to see a saint in a glass case. It's rather interesting, this. And this, you could see the skin and everything, and all the rest of it. But nobody's actually saying that the body of Alexander the Great still has flesh on it. They're just saying that they're visiting somebody that they believe is Alexander the Great in this glass case. Are we so far there, Kathy? Are we on your thread so far?
Well, yes, I was just wondering, I've heard about the glass coffin as well, but I wondered what the technology was.
Well, the technology is sort of there, because if you pour molten glass onto a tray of sand, you could possibly get sheets of glass. Okay, this is the technique that they're using. We do know that the Romans did have panes of glass in their buildings.
Big enough for a pole.
The sand would stick to molten glass.
It wouldn't be that. It would be. Yeah, exactly. I'm just going to talk about that a second. I'll just get Jane out.
Cheers, Jane.
You've got to go in there first. They go back. Well, it may not melt a bit, but then sand will stick. So it would be a pain.
Like the bathroom window.
Unless you then have to try
It's good. It's good. Jane, I'll see you next week.
Yeah,
Take care, lovely. Bye.
Bye.
You're
Cheers.
going as well. Okay. Andy, we're not seeing you next week. We'll see you Okay. See you, Andrea. See you. Take care. Jane, I'm back.
We was upset. It was a mistake because you just didn't. There was all this stuff and you didn't know what to do with it.
Right, anyway, I'm on Claire will break your stand.
It was a little thing.
It says found the line and then found the line and then Cambridge, didn't they?
Yeah, it's a short one. A short one. It's somewhere. I've seen it.
Okay.
I don't know if
It's Cardiff, isn't it?
I don't know if I was Googling it. But you can see a picture of it. Actually, Sarah.
Oh, he was buried in Cambridge.
How might you show us a picture of it? It's quite worn and stony.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't sort of quite look like a lion.
Well, no, don't
Straight on.
like the dolphin. Go on.
Were those lions on at the beginning? Were those lions
Now,
back there?
the interesting thing, you're all talking about a glass coffin. Were these? It could have actually been panelled. We don't know. We've just got a description that it was a glass coffin. It could have been just a glass lid. It's very difficult to work out from this description. So I know you are dead right. You sort of lay. Sand is made out of silica. It's made out of glass. It's made out of. So glass is made out of sand anyway. So it's going to stick. So it's really difficult to work that one out anyway. Anyway. So what's happening next? And I like the description of removing his chest armour, his golden chest armour and the skin coming off. I like that bit, Kathy, but that's not what I've got here. Now, the other one who actually loots the tomb of Alexander the Great, is written down, is Nero. Nero, it said, visited the tomb of Alexander the Great and nicked his sword. But then again, it said that Julius Caesar had nicked his sword as well. So there's sword nicking. So can you see this, right? We've got this person in history, but people have visited him. They can't have just visited nobody. This is where we're going. Caligula is said around AD 40 to have removed Alexander the Great's breastplate. Wonderful stuff. Wonderful stuff. So we're far away from him being buried at Ammonopolis of Macedonia. But if we look at this here, this puts another perspective. Lots of people believe, from the description, the breastplate, the sword, maybe the shield, maybe some spears, and the helmet. This is what he was actually buried with. In AD 199, Septimus Severus, the great Roman emperor, who was an emperor with dark skin, is believed to be believed to have been black, but he was actually from Africa. Septimus Severus. He was a Roman emperor. Actually died in York. Actually, he visited Alexander the Great's tomb in 199, and he sealed it up. He didn't want. He wanted to keep it as a special place. And then his son Caracalla in 215 is said to have relocated the tomb of Alexander the Great. Now this is an interesting clue. Relocated it, what, to Ammonopolis? This is the point, you see. Caracalla was obsessed with Alexander the Great. We don't know if he took anything from it. Some say he took the ring, one of Alexander the Great's ring off one of his fingers. We don't know. But his body was actually moved, some say. It was actually relocated. A chronicler writing about Caracalla some years later tells us that Caracalla removed Alexander the Great's tunic, his ring, as I've mentioned, and also his belt. But other people say that he actually replaced them back with Alexander the Great when he was being relocated elsewhere. Now, is it all this fiction or is all this fantasy? But it does go on a little bit more. Is this man still in Alexandria? Yes, he is, because in AD 400, a certain John of Chrysostom visits Alexandria. Chrysostom visited Alexandria in AD 400. What was that, Kathy?
How do you say it again?
It's CHRYAS.
She knows her stuff.
TUM.
She knows her stuff. It's said that he visited the tomb of Alexander the Great in AD 400. His tomb, even his own people know not where it was. Now, he didn't. No, by AD 400, it's supposedly disappeared. However, Islamic writers in 603, 696, and even 1494 write about the whereabouts of Alexander's tomb. And Leo the African in 1494 writes, "In the midst of the ruins of Alexandria, there still remains a small edifice, built like a chapel, worthy of note, on account of a remarkable tomb held in high honour by the Mahmetans, in which the sepulchre, they assert, is preserved the body of Alexander the Great. An immense crowd of strangers come hither, even from distant countries, for the sake of worshipping and doing homage to the tomb, on which they likewise frequently bestow considerable donations."
And where exactly was that?
This is in Alexandria.
Even in 14 something.
1494, yeah.
1494.
So in other words, the body disappears sometime in 400, but it's back there. And the strange thing is, considerable donations are bestowed upon it. And what we say here about the Muslims, we hear considering that they don't like having tombs of people to do with other religions. But this guy's venerated. He's worshipped. And a visitor an English visitor, George Sandys, visits in 1611 Alexandria, has said that he actually sees the resting place of Alexander the Great in 1611, which is great. So surely his body has survived. Except, if we look here, this is a map from 1893. And all this area here has been taken over by the sea. It's apparently since the time of the birth of Christ, the water level here has risen about 12 inches, which doesn't sound a considerable amount. But if lots of these sites were actually within the sort of water margins, they could have been subsumed by the water. It's said by around here is the tomb of Alexander the Great. So the last bit of this today is mentioning the final story. The final story is this. Over 140 attempts in the 1800s were made to find the location of Alexander the Great's tomb. And it's said that his body is actually found under this building here. Just had it. Hang on, got those. It's to be found under this building, which is actually a Muslim mosque. In 1850, Ambrosi Skizili announced the discovery of the alleged Alexander's mummy and tomb inside the Nabi Daniel Mosque in Alexandria. Later, in 1874, a stone worker accidentally broke through the vaulted chamber inside the basement of the mosque. He says that he peeped through and he saw some granite monuments with an angular summit was discernible there, but the entrance was then walled up and the stoneworker was asked not to disclose the incident. It's said that in 1888, the archaeologist Schliemann is said to have visited Alexandria. And this is where the mosque is, by here. But he was denied permission in 1888 to investigate. And from that moment onwards, this burial place of Alexander the Great has been lost ever since, except for a report in the Second World War where somebody actually went underground in this area and they went down a passageway and they saw what seemed to be some kind of glass box, right, down this sort of passageway. And they come up to tell somebody about it and they went down and they couldn't find it again. But there's all these different reports. But very much likely that Alexander the Great is buried somewhere in Alexandria itself.
Was that you?
So what we're going to do, we want to do a little bit of a stab of Alexander the Great. Are there any questions about this today?
Just a quickie.
Quickie.
When all these Roman emperors that were in there pinching the breastplates and the swords and that, I mean, was the tomb just open for years and years and years? If so, why didn't the locals just take the whole bloody lot? Must have been tempting, mustn't it?
It must have been tempting. It must have been guarded. Because if it's got the gold breastplate, the gold helmet, the gold sword and all the rest of it, it must have been guarded. So obviously these people with these people with power are going in there and saying, oh, I want a bit of that.
Right.
They just take it away. But you're dead right in that. How much of what's at Alexandria is actually fact or fiction? But you've got all these people visiting it. And the site at Ammonopolis has been proven now to be the site of the burial place of his mother. Because as they excavated it, you've got blocked up doorways, you've got another blocked up doorway, you've got damaged mosaic as they go in. And this is where his mother, Olympias, is actually buried in here. But she's not buried with her son. Any other questions on that today? No? So next week we're going to be doing a Swedish Viking warrior. And we're going to be looking at, she turned out to be a Viking man in the 1920s, and then she turned out to be a female warrior a little bit later. If there's no more questions, have we all enjoyed that today?
Yes.
Yeah, good. And many thanks for coming along today, and I'll see you all next week. Anyone else not coming next week? No?
I'll try and make bridge end in the afternoon.
Okay, that'd be great. I've got to get you some eggs.
Yep. Fair enough.
And many thanks for those who are going to help pack up.
Well, you got all these bits here if you want to. Okay.
Oh, hang on! Stop! We haven't finished yet. Just give me 2 minutes. We haven't finished yet, everybody. We haven't finished yet. I just want to do this. So I said I'll do this. Rare gaming piece from Lindisfarne reveals link with Viking invaders. So look at that there, that wonderful glass piece there. Look at that piece there. In the wonderful blue glass here. It is not large and might easily have been discarded as a pebble by a less careful hand. And this has been found within the excavations at Lindisfarne. We only did Lindisfarne this year. So that's basically the update.
What date is that?
This is dating from...
With the top of the paper.
this dates from the 7th of February 2020. And this itself has obviously been announced now. We are starting to get an insight into the actual lives of the people who were in the monastery rather than just their cemeteries and their afterlives. Archaeologists believe the object made from swirling blue and white glass with a small crown of white glass droplets is a gaming piece from the Viking board game, can't pronounce that, or a local version of the game, and offers a rare tangible link between Lindisfarne Anglo-Saxon monastery and the culture that overwhelmed it. I'll try and pronounce this game. Near fair truth. Viking gaming piece, there it is again. Wonderful. And what we've got here, detectors help us find Roman Britain. And oh God, look at that there. Ooh. Now this was worthwhile staying behind for a little bit longer. So this one itself is so one of the most striking finds recorded was this bronze head of Marcus Aurelius that was found in Oxfordshire. I have never seen that ever. Have you seen that? Shut up, you. I have never seen that. That is stunning, right? Absolutely wonderful. Head of Marcus Aurelius, who reigned up until AD 180, one of the greatest of Roman emperors. A gold crescent earring associated with goddess Diana. And there we've got a Staffordshire enamelled drinking vessel there with writing on it. Absolutely spectacular. Well worth seeing that. Brilliant.
What for detectorate?
Yeah, 5 Mile Lane, archaeologists making a right tits ear of it, yeah. So, I don't mind you saying that. Developer agrees to save Roman villa after protest. A housing development threatened to build over an exceptional Roman villa discovered during work on a new Cotswolds estate has agreed to preserve remains after a campaign by locals. I've got to be honest with you, with my life being threatened and all the rest of it, nobody did anything to save our Roman villa here, did they? Do you know what I mean? I don't know why that one was saved and our one demolished. And the road wasn't even built on it. The future of the villa and bathhouse, which was found by archaeologists working at Bovis Homes Development, Gloucester, was secured at a meeting. So it's been saved. Wicked! Excellent. And here we go. Neanderthals may have regularly climbed on active volcanoes. We mentioned this a few weeks ago. But again, footprints of these wonderful Neanderthals dating about 50,000 years, known as Devil's Trails. And the final piece here. Oh, this is going to be the highlight of today. New Forest asked for help in collecting ancient graffiti marks, and I have never read this before. Graffiti marks on trees and stuff. Okay? This is great. Graffiti and symbols that were carved into trees and in the New Forest centuries ago to ward off evil spirits and identify timber for the Navy are to be catalogued. Initials, dates, pictures, poems and royal marks can be found throughout the National Park in Hampshire, but they have never been recorded for posterity. Brilliant idea. The New Forest is lucky to have the densest population of ancient and veteran trees in Western Europe. These come with a lot of stories as well as old graffiti, and which you might not find elsewhere. One of the most common symbols is the King's Mark, a broad arrowhead that was used to identify trees reserved for royal shipbuilding. Once iron and steel had been introduced to shipbuilding, the trees remain untouched, but they still bear the royal mark and not cut down. Quickly, here we go. Various other symbols, witches' marks to ward off evil spirits. Over time, the marks are warping or are being damaged by animals. We believe that there are hundreds of markings in the forest which provide a tangible insight into the past and how people interacted with it. Some of the trees in the forest are up to 1,000 years old, so the markings could be centuries old. We want to be able to refer back to these glimpses into the New Forest past, even when the trees themselves are lost. Do you know what? That has got to be the article of the week. I know Marcus Aurelius, that is an article of the week, just for Alan, but that for me is the article of the week. That is brilliant. Thanks for that, Chris. Any other questions? No? Thank you very much. See you all next week. Go! I think that's it. It's a brilliant end.
Right? Yeah, it was good, yeah.
Hang on there.